This video is going to focus on writing the recommendation report, our analytic report, and really the kind of two different options you're going to have for how you might structure your report. So it's going to review what you might say are the required parts, and then you're going to find that your report's going to probably fall into one of these two different approaches. So let's first look at the overview from our assignment sheet of the parts of a recommendation report. There's the front matter, and I'm not going to go into the details about what goes into each part of these the front matter, because it's handled very well in our textbook, and we'll look at an example as well. So there's the letter of transmittal, which is in memo format, and it's a letter to your audience. For us, we can skip the cover page, but we do need a title page. And then for us, I'm making the option to skip the abstract. And then of course you need a table of contents. And if you do have some figures and illustrations, you need those listed. And then an executive summary. And think about this, that somebody may not want to read the whole report and they'll go straight to the executive summary. Then we have the body of the report, which for us is going to involve 5 parts. And it's kind of a traditional report format. Even kind of dissertations fall into this almost. An introduction, and then a methods section. And methods can be confusing, but really these are just outlining for your reader what you did, why you did it, and then in a sense how you did it. So this is a report in terms of you had to go out and look for something, find out something. Well, where did you go? How did you find out? Because the reader may gauge or assess the quality and credibility of your report based upon how you got your information. And here you want to reveal how you got your information. The results or findings section is where you present what you found, your results, the data, just kind of raw information. In the results section, you want to make sure that you're not already coming to conclusions and assessing and judging. You just kind of lay your cards on the table, in a sense. It's in the conclusion section where you do put together the pieces, you connect the dots, and what does this mean? What are the implications? What are the judgments of your results? And then you have your recommendations, which is what the whole report is about, based upon between the options and the needs for this opportunity or this kind of problem or whatever you're recommending. You're going to tell your reader what you recommend they should do. And then you may have some back matter, which if you need to define technical terms, there's a glossary. You definitely need your references, your APA references, and then any appendix material. So let's look at that example and run through the parts. Here we've got our letter of transmittal. Notice it's in memo format with full block format. Our title page, and our textbook has a nice model for how to set up your title page. This particular report did do an abstract, so just kind of ignore that. And then your table of contents. And notice that the items that you put in your table of contents are basically your header level 2 and level 3. The title of the whole report is your level 1. Here we get to our executive summary. I'm sorry. These items are header level 1s. So here's header level 1, executive summary. Introduction. It's a pretty short introduction. Yours might be a little bit longer. And then here's the methods. And this happens to be what I'm calling a multitask. So for each one of their tasks, they go into how they checked out, how they went about getting information. And for each one of their tasks. This is just how they got information. And then here are their results, their findings. And notice that they go by task. So the results on the first task, what they found out, the results on the second task. And notice how they're also including some graphics. Don't be afraid to put in graphics. I know our example in the textbook does not have any. And see how they will list, this is figure 7, this is figure 8. Here's figure 9, which is a bar graph. Representing information, you might be able to do some of this through some graphs and charts and tables. And then here's their section of conclusions, which is they're pulling together what they have found out from their data, and then the final recommendations, which essentially serves as your conclusion. The one thing I like about the recommendations section, if I'm remembering in our textbook, both the conclusions and the recommendations is, and this is on page 507 and 509, is that they're using headings to designate, to specify particular conclusions and particular recommendations. This particular report doesn't do that. And then here's a list of illustrations and their references page, which is formatted in APA. So that, let's go back to our kind of outline. When we look at the body of the report, there are these sections. The introduction, which does a lot of things that are specified in the textbook. Your methods, where you talk about what did you do, how and why did you do it, to find out. And then the results or finding sections. What did you see? What did you find out? The raw data. And then the conclusion section, where you talk about what it means. You describe the implications and judgments from your results. And then the recommendations. And as I mentioned, if you have multiple conclusions, go ahead and label them, name them, and give them headings for both particular conclusions and particular recommendations you have. Now, I've kind of figured out that this is what's confusing for me in our textbook, and then looking at the technical writing online, that there's really kind of two types of recommendation reports. And one of them I'll call the multitask, and the other the single task report. So in the multitask, there's kind of multiple tasks that may involve certain criteria or decision points within that task to come to your recommendation. Like, for example, in our textbook example, they talk about one of their tasks being assessing available tablets. And they do that based upon certain criteria. Like, they set up 4 criteria to assess the available tablets: cost, HIPAA compliance, security features, and ease of disinfection. Now, many of you all have what I call a single task recommendation report, which resembles the way Technical Writing Online is setting up its recommendation reports. Now, they're not following exactly the way we have the introduction, the methods, and they don't have the same name for these parts, but in a sense they're doing some of the same things. So I want us to use our headings, but I'm looking at this technical writing to kind of show the way in which they dig into what we might call a single task and present findings and conclusions on that single task. So let's look at an example from them. Okay. So let's do this. Now they don't have the same beginning parts, but they set up their options. This is about recommendation for a glucose monitoring system purchase. So this is kind of introduction stuff. They don't really go into methods. These are their options for the different ones that they'll explore. There's 4. Now here's their comparison section. And notice that their comparison section is set up by these criteria. So what they've got here is essentially the same thing as the results section. They're giving us results for each of their criteria. And then this summary presents conclusions that they're pulling. So the summary section here is basically the same as our conclusion section. And one thing I like that these reports do is that they give a comparison chart. So in your conclusion section, where you're connecting the dots, where you're pulling together these different findings, you can produce a comparison chart, or sometimes it's called a decision matrix in our textbook. That comparison chart could possibly go in your results finding, maybe at the bottom, at the end. But I wanted you to see how they're focusing on a single decision, single recommendation over these 4 options in this case, and they're doing, for each of the criteria, they're getting the information, the data. Let's look at one more comparison. A number of y'all are doing cars or schools. So here's kind of their introductory stuff. Again, we're doing more, but here's where they get into, this is what we would call the results or findings, and they're structuring it by criteria. Overall driving experience, vehicle cockpit, safety, price. Now, I'm not sure how I like these really clumpy paragraphs. You could have multiple paragraphs. You could have other ways that you present information you're learning on each one of your criteria, or what I call decision points. So let's go back and see this different way for a single task recommendation report. You might have your introduction with all that it does, and then when you talk about methods, you're talking about what did you do and how did you do it and why. And this, depending upon yours, but it may be structured by criteria and decision point. Okay, price. How do we look up price? Vehicle reliability. Who do we talk to? What do we find out about that? So for each of your criteria or decision points, you talk about what you did. Now, some of them may be very, very similar as far as where you went to get information. So you might be able to pull together a section that describes how you got multiple criteria, information on multiple criteria. But notice that the results and findings are structured by criteria decision point, not task. So some of you all are structuring your papers I would recommend structuring it this way. So again, in that results findings section, you've got heading level 3 based upon criteria or decision points. So here's kind of a comparison. If you look at the two, there's the introduction. The method section is not really done in here, but the comparison, this section is very much the same, and the conclusions might be very similar in recommendations. So some of you all have been kind of confused about tasks and criteria and decision points, and how, because you really essentially had a single task. What school do I want to attend? What car do I want to buy? What scooter is the best scooter for me? So you may be able to kind of do it as task and then have those criteria within, kind of like our report in our example one, and that's fine. And I'm going to share the example report that we looked at in here, this one, so you can see kind of how they did keep it as multitask and have some internal criteria. Let's talk just a little bit about format, and notice that it's using headings, and notice the spacing. There's an extra space between the header level 1 and then where the text starts. Same thing with heading 2, but when you get to the heading 3, I thought we had some heading 3s. Guess we don't. The heading 3, you would not have the extra space. It goes straight like that. Here we go. So heading level 1, heading 2, heading level 3. I think that that's a long enough video on this recommendation report. I hope that it's helpful, and that you will have a good report as it comes out at the end. So contact me with questions, and pass by any kind of particular questions that you have.